thoughts, a basket of ideas around division, specifically differences between people that are accelerating over time. And there's a lot of data that we could look at to illustrate this, but I want to go into a different direction and just share this report that I was tipped off to through the news. And this is from the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. And boy, that sounds loaded. From January 2024, and I'm making this in January 2024. It's entitled Them versus Us, the Two Americas and How the Nation's Elite is Out of Touch with Average Americans. Now, I want to address some of the overt directionality of this. That's how I'll say it. This report, and we're mostly just going to look at the charts. I'm interested in the polls, but obviously this is very loaded language, and I don't want you to presuppose where I'm going with this because of the loaded language. So this idea of a bifurcation of America between two groups, we'll just say two groups, it's nothing new. It's been going on for a long time, and it's completely incorrect to think of this as a political party division, because that's not it. And this report is looking at it from an economic basis, and as we'll see in their criteria, I don't think that's correct either. But one of the people who looked at this not a long time ago, but somewhat a long time ago, I guess. Sorry, the window's a little off here. Is this author Charles Murray. This is the most I can move over this picture, but this is just Amazon's website for this book, Coming Apart, that he wrote. There you go. By Charles Murray. Now, the subtitle's The State of White America. I don't know why it's subtitled that, but here's the thing. If you don't want to read this book, you can actually look for talks that Charles Murray gave on this topic. You can look it up. His thesis is very compelling. What he does is he walks through 50 years of history in this country to show that underneath of the covers, invisible to most people, there's actually been a tremendous shift in the background of the people who make most decisions in the United States. And that's actually true globally. He focuses here. There's been this shift from essentially a highly heterogeneous American experience to a highly homogeneous small set of people who are making the decisions. And one example from just off the top of my head, because it's been years since I watched him speak about this. I have not read this book, but I watched a couple of talks that he gave on it. And one of the examples he uses, he analyzes presidential cabinets over the years, and just in a quick summary, he says, look, it wasn't that long ago that on a presidential cabinet, you had a bunch of people who either had normal American lives before they got into politics, or their parents did, or their neighbors did growing up, or whatever. A simple example of this is Harry Truman was a farmer, and then he became president of the United States. Jimmy Carter was too. And say what you will about their presidencies, the point is that they had experiences outside of the bubble of this, what people call elite lifestyle. Now, I hate that word. It's a word that's been co-opted and corrupted. It's not a bad word. It's used always in a negative connotation currently, but it just means better. Of course, now, today, it's used as anything but that. It's used to describe this small cohort of people who are pulling the strings, who usually have a lot of money, but they always have a lot of power. And that's not, we need a better word for that. If you have a good suggestion, please put it in the comments. I'm searching for one. That's a co-opted word that we need to get back to what we're actually saying on. Anyway, so in this study, move this back. In this study, what we're seeing is the present effect of this, where we stand today in this division. Now, I haven't really talked about what that division is, and I don't really care to. I think we can keep it at the superficial level for the purposes of this conversation, just to keep it short. You can look this up. I'm not going to read it to you. But I just want to, first we have to talk about how they made the split. They talk about 3 categories of people here. The first division is between those who make 150,000 or more and have at least one postgraduate degree. So if you have a master's or better and you make 150K or more, you're considered elite for this study. Now, that in and of itself is highly problematic, because I think the one, and I don't have access to their data to be able to say, to prove this, but my hypothesis, and I think I could argue in favor of it, is that there's going to be a gross perversion of, there's going to be a high distinction between the opinions of people who have graduate degrees and those who do not. I don't think that the money thing is as important a variable here, because frankly, there are so many people that make 150,000 or more in this country who do not feel the way they're presenting here. And 150,000 a year is still middle class. That's not a lot of money today in 2024. That if you're a single income family, you got to be about there to be comfortable. So that's if you want a bunch of kids and you want to be single income, that's hardly elite. You know, if you have 5 kids or more and that's what you're bringing in as a family, you might not even be able to go on a vacation every year. Anyway, so especially with housing prices today, it's unlikely if you're getting into a house, but I digress. So that's just my full disclosure on their use of the word elite. I don't like it, but that's what they used and we'll go with it. And now you know what they mean when they say it. So now let's go through their survey results. First question, are your personal finances getting better or worse these days? So voters means everyone. And again, I'm not sure why they didn't just say that. And then they're quote unquote elite. And then they have a third distinction, which is those who've graduated from an Ivy League university. And I'll just spoil the punchline up front. The Ivy League folks are just a more extreme version of the elite when it comes to the behaviors that are highlighted in this study, or the positions that are highlighted in this study. So, are your personal finances getting better or worse these days? Here's the results. You can look at it. I'll just say normal people instead of voters. How about that? Or everyone. That's probably the cleanest way. So if you polled everyone, 40% say they're getting worse. And 60% say they're getting better. But that 60% is, I'm sorry, I totally messed that up. I misread the slices here. 40% of everyone says worse. 40% say the same and 20% say better. But then when you slide into folks with a graduate degree and who are making 150 or more a year, almost everyone says better. And then if you look at the Ivy Leagues, it's even more exaggerated. 88% of them say better, 9% say the same, only 3% say worse. So this is a very different experience, right? Nationally, amongst everyone, you got 40% of people who say things are getting worse, and a whole 40% saying it's the same. But there's a huge exaggeration to the positive side as people have more degrees and more money. So let's keep looking, because this trend just keeps going, and it's quite disturbing, frankly. Does the United States provide too much individual freedom? That in and of itself is going to flag a whole lot of people. It's going to trigger a whole lot of people, because freedom does not come from the government. It comes from God. And if you know anything about the founding of this country, you should know that quite well, that was highly ingrained into the Declaration of Independence, for example. Anyway, Does the United States provide too much individual freedom, too much government control, or is the balance about right? And without going through the details, which you can see here, you can look them up, it's the same exact pattern, and it's predictable that with more money and more degrees, people think that there's too much freedom. And more than half in the Ivy League category think there's too much freedom. If you look at everyone, the majority believe there's too much control. All right? Here's a disturbing one, rationing. To fight climate change, would you favor or oppose the strict rationing of gas, meat, and electricity? 63% of everyone would oppose it. If you go to the 150,000 or more, or one or more graduate degrees, 77% of people say they would favor it. It goes up to almost 90% at the Ivy League level. Now, I'll pause here to make explicit something that I hope you've already thought about. When it comes to the people who are in positions to make policy changes, government, every level of government, and leading corporations, do you think that those people, and I'll say leading banks as well, because I think that's a separate category to corporations, it's a subcategory, but a very important one. Do you think that those people tend to be like most Americans, or do they make 150,000 or more and have at least one graduate degree, or are they Ivy League graduates? And this highlights something that I've told you many times, and I really don't think I'm being taken seriously on these points that I make by most people that watch this, which is still obviously a hyper minority of the general population. You look around you look in your family, you look at your job, you look at your very narrow experience in your life, which I'm not knocking you, anyone has a narrow experience in their life, but you're not looking at the big picture. You're assuming the big picture is the same as your little picture. And when I say things like, hey, there's going to be rationing of gas, meat, and electricity, you say, what a wacko, how could that ever be? Because in my life, yeah, I might know a few people who would support that sort of thing. But for almost everyone I know would never support that, and we live in a democracy. So how could that ever happen? Guess what? The people pulling the strings are over here. They're not over here. And when I say the foundations have already been removed, these people are already in power. And you just keep looking down at the grindstone right in front of you, and you don't see that. You don't see that because you don't work in a university faculty. You don't work in a government job. You're not on the president's cabinet. You're not in Congress. You don't know the governor of your state. Okay? If you did have more of those sorts of things, if you were more closely working with the wheels that turn, the millions and hundreds of millions of dollars, the power bases, the people, if you were 2 connections away from Jamie Dimon, who runs the biggest bank in the world, maybe you would see what I'm trying to tell you. It's that bad. This isn't something that's going to happen in 50 years. The people who believe these things are already in power, and they're doing everything they can to push this out to everyone else. Their lack of doing that is only a factor of them not having figured out how to do it yet. They are pushing this thing, and it is moving. It's not something that's in the future. It's already happening, and it's happening faster than you're realizing and admitting. I just saw another news article, and I told you about this. Go watch those future warnings videos. They're shutting down even more coal power plants in the U.S. There is nothing to replace those. They haven't launched something that's that replaces it. And now they're saying, look, we found another way to solve this problem. They're saying maybe someday we'll be able to do this with wind and solar, but we just need to shut this down right now because there's all this pressure for green this and green that, and we just need to get rid of it. There's nothing to replace it. They're already doing this. You've already experienced the government control. I don't think I have to go into that. You get it. Oh, one thing I did want to bring up on this question, though, and this is, you got to understand how this works. The beginning of this question is absolutely crucial. It doesn't say, would you favor or oppose the strict rationing of these things? It says, to fight climate change, would you do this? So the question of what is your highest priority, what issues for you are transcendent, meaning existential. Like what problems in your mind are so bad that the ends justify the means, that we don't need to think about the cost because it just needs to get done. That's how I feel every time I need to do my taxes. I hate doing my taxes. It's such an abominable thing at every level. It's a huge waste of time. It's so frustrating to see just how much of your money goes to things you don't like, and just how obfuscated all those forms are, and how almost all of America who just goes to H&R Block or whoever does it on TurboTax has no idea all these crazy obfuscations and loopholes and everything else that are done to carve in certain people and where that money's going to and who's not having to pay taxes. So I have to upgrade that to an existential thing where for a whole day, I don't care, a comet could hit the earth, I'm doing my taxes. Because I hate it so much that I have to upgrade it to, I can't care about anything else while I'm doing it. And for people who have no meaning in their life and who regularly do very bad things, they need a replacement for religion. And most religious people, that's what they use religion for. It's not a pathway to show them how to be better. It's an excuse for them to continue to be bad and not feel so bad about it. And that's what climate change is for these kinds of people. They don't have religion to make them feel good while being bad. And so they create one and they call it climate change, or whatever the flavor of the week is on their existential crisis. That's what COVID was for these people. And when you make something a supernal, transcendent, existential priority in your life, what happens is anything you attach to that becomes justified, no matter how insane it might seem. And now if you go back and you look at the communist regimes or the rise to power of the Nazis or any of these totalitarian states, it's not such a mystery of how they came into power. It's because someone managed to wedge into their heads that this, whatever the idea was the existential crisis. And then everything else was justified. They didn't have to think about it, and they could override any emotional checks. You have to be a complete moron to think it's a good idea to ration gas, meat, or electricity. And 89% of Ivy League graduates are complete morons. That's what this shows. Why? Because their system has been hijacked. These people can solve differential equations back and forth. They've got vocabularies that are enormous. They can do some really impressive things. But they don't have the common sense to see how bad this is because their system has been hijacked. Now, you could do this same sort of study, splitting this differently than these people have and with different questions to expose irrationality in other segments of society, like the highly religious. It's the same problem for the same reasons. They've substituted something in place of the actual transcendental purpose, the actual existential meaning. They've been hijacked. Let's keep going with this, though. We're almost through. How much would you personally be willing to pay each year in terms of taxes and higher costs to reduce climate change? You see the same pattern. We probably don't have to go into details. You get it. Okay? Now this, well, I don't want to digress. I like this phrase, the talking professions. I'd probably call it something a little more colorful. Lawyers, lobbyists, union leaders, or journalists. The scourge of society professions. Sorry to any attorneys that are watching this. Sometimes the world has created the need for, it's like a good warrior, right? It would be nice if we could all beat our swords into plows, but while situations endure that prevent that, we need warriors, good warriors, to fight the bad ones. And that's how it is with lawyers. The other ones, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure there are any redeeming lobbyists, union leaders, or journalists. Journalist just means activists today, and it's not the good kind. I guess I feel about activists the same way I do about apologists. I don't know how anyone applies that title to themselves in a good way. But anyway, so you see the same pattern here as well, although it's, I think, a more subtle pattern than the other questions. There's presidential approval. We'll skip that for time. Here's an interesting one. I'll just read the question. If you had a choice between a candidate who said the teachers and other education professionals should decide what students are taught, and a candidate who said that parents need more control over what their children are taught, for whom would you vote? So, not surprisingly, there's a greater proportion of every man who supports parental control of education, and then that trend exaggeratively explodes towards teachers and professionals deciding what children are taught as you go to the making more money, having more degrees, and then Ivy League. It's the same pattern of exaggeration as you go through those layers. But what's highly discouraging is how low the percent of every person who says parents should control that. It's only 45%. 17% of people said not sure. And what this shows me is 38% plus 17% of people should not be having kids. That's what this shows me. If you think a stranger could educate your child better than you can, you should not have children. All right, now here's another one as far as the banning that we talked about, rationing. Here's banning. To fight climate change, would you favor banning each of the following? And everything I said about the other one applies to this one. But look at these categories and try to tell me that what I'm telling you is going to happen is as insane as it sounds. So I've said on multiple occasions, I've said, look, if you live in a place where you rely on air conditioning to survive, if your life would be radically more difficult without air conditioning, you need to move. And people hear that and they're like, that's crazy talk. That's insane. Why would you say that? Well, because I see the push towards these things, and I understand that already, if you go to do a $200, $400 repair to your AC system from pre-COVID, that's what it would cost pre-COVID, it's going to cost 10 times as much today. 10 times as much because of a confluence of factors that you can track right now. And guess what? They're all dots on a line. And if you continue the trend, guess where it goes? It crosses the threshold where anybody can afford it. If you can find it at all, you lose availability and the cost goes through the roof. And not only does the cost of one thing go through the roof, it happens against a backdrop of everything going through the roof. These are simple things that any normal person should be able to see if their heads aren't buried so far in their third point of contact that they can't see a dang thing because you live in denial about everything. Private air conditioning. I love the use of the word private in this. Only 13% of the general population would favor banning air conditioning in your house. 53% of people with at least one graduate degree who make $150,000 or more believe it should be banned. It goes up to 68% of Ivy League grads. So guess who sets the rules for this? The EPA does. Guess who works at the EPA? It's not the general public. It's people who have master's degrees and PhDs who make $150,000 or more a year. And the people running those, that becomes more true the higher you go in those agencies. And the people who make the decisions are Ivy League graduates. They tend to be. Same pattern for SUVs, gas-powered cars, and gas stoves. Now, I'm going to talk about non-essential travel here separately. When you see the word non-essential in front of something, in this context, you have to understand that the people who support these bans think that they are essential. You don't have to take my word for it. Look at COVID. Essential employees had to keep working. Non-essential employees did not. You see this at the people who go to these climate conferences and they take private jets to do so. They think that remember the ends justify the means, they're exempt from the pollution of air travel because they're serving a higher cause. It's the normal people who need to get banned from flying. Now, I've told you that the time would come when the travel we know today will come to an end. And like almost everything else, that happens on a ramp with spikes. In this case, drops down. It's a downward ramp with cliffs, in this case. And so one of the sources of that shift can very well be the attitudes of the people making the rules. And there's a million different ways that could happen. But the point is, it's going to happen. And if right now you could hop on a plane for a reasonable price and get to pretty much anywhere you want to go, and all you have to do is take off your shoes and your belt and submit to that humiliation of the naked body scanner, the time is fast coming when it will be much more difficult. With availability, with cost, with hoops to jump through, it will be much more difficult. To go into specifics is to run the risk of, oh, you were wrong because you said this is exactly how it's going to happen. And I mean, it happened, but not the way you said. Okay, so let's just leave it at it's going to happen. Gas-powered cars. 81% of Ivy League grads believe they should be banned. Let me tell you something. So this is what you'll find out. One of the things you'll find out in Charles Murray's book that I referred you to is that most of the people making the biggest decisions in this country have never lived in a place that's not on the coasts of this country. These are folks who've always lived in gated communities. Both their parents have PhDs. They've always been on the wealthier side. Normal people understand the need, the utility of gas-powered cars. I just saw in the news today with this cold front that came through the U.S. in the last few weeks. Electric cars don't work well in the cold. And all these low information people that bought electric cars, what do you mean my car's not going to work when it's freezing outside? I don't understand. And they were stranded. They don't understand. They're banning semi-trucks in California, and no one cares to do the math on the efficiency of diesel fuel versus electric when you're hauling loads. And who does it hurt the most? The poorest people. Because as we saw in the previous chart, it said something about paying a $500 tax for climate change. Who knows how that's actually going to help anything, but to a person who has climate change as one of the top priorities in their hierarchy and happens to have lots of money, paying $500 for that, why wouldn't you do that? I mean, religious people usually pay much more than $500 a year to their church, right? So it's the same idea. But when you get to poorer people, they don't have $500 for something that's not already spent. They have to take away from things like shoes for their kids to pay more money to something. And so to tell someone, well, you could have an electric car, it's only going to cost you twice as much as a gas-powered car when you factor in insurance and, and you're not going to be able to use it when it's freezing. But if that's a problem for you, you just need to live somewhere else. Live in what are they calling them? A 15-minute city. So all the rural people, which is, by the way, I think 98% of the geographical area of the United States is classified as rural. It's a pretty big place. It's most of the country, geographically. I don't remember the statistic of population. Obviously, it's less than half. All right. I think we got through this. This is serious stuff. These are changes that are going to happen. One more thing on gas-powered cars. California and Washington State, I don't know about any other states, but they're probably more on the list. They've both overtly said, we're going to ban gas-powered cars. And we're going to try to do it in so many years. And I think Washington State, the goal's 5. 5 years from now, you can't have a gas-powered car. Now, let's walk through this just for a second because it's a generalized pattern. One of the ways normal people don't realize this is happening until it's too late is because even when the law is changed, they'll do something like, well, it's going to be banned in X number of years. And so that softens the adjustment when you average it across the population. The other thing they do is say, we're only going to apply this to new purchases or repairs. So the U.S. government has made massive changes to refrigerant regulations. You probably don't know about this. And what they've done is they've created a cap on how much of the previous coolant can be produced per year, which makes the price skyrocket if you're replacing an existing, if you're refilling an existing system, which is a fairly routine thing to do on an AC unit. If it gets a leak or something, or a compressor goes out and you have to take it out. And then on the newer systems, they cost a fortune compared to the older systems because they use a less efficient coolant that's quote unquote better for the environment. So when changes like that happen, you're not going to know until your AC unit breaks and you call the people thinking it's going to cost $500 and it costs $5,000. Or you have to wait 8 months to get it fixed because the coolant you need isn't available right now. You just have to get in line and wait because they're rationing it. That's already happening. That's not in the future. With these gas stoves, same deal. They might not come into your house and take your old one, but the second that breaks, which happens, you're not going to be able to replace it with the same one. It's going to cost way more and work way less. That's the way these things go. So if you live in a state like Washington or California, where a big neon sign has been put up that says you will not be driving gas-powered cars in the near future, and you don't move, you are an idiot. Because the cascading effects of that change are going to be enormous. Now, I was talking to a friend of mine, and so I had a little more license. I can fly off the handle in these videos because I'm not face-to-face with someone, and I have... I'm less bounded by their reaction. If someone is obviously not in favor of what you're saying, you don't push very hard. You just kind of let them figure it out for themselves. There's some measure to that. But anyway, in this conversation, I had a little more latitude because this is a lifelong friend and his wife, and they live in Washington State. And they were like, hey, yeah, the governor said that so we're probably going to get out of here in about 5 years. And I said, isn't that about when the ban takes place? Yeah, but we're going to miss it. I said, don't you understand that everybody and their brother is going to be selling their house at the same time as you? Anyone with a brain, that's kind of the last chance to get out of Dodge. Don't you think you should do that a little sooner? Yeah, well, we just don't want to be stressed out. All right. And that's how normal people think. All right? So, you have to get ahead of these things, and if the writing's on the wall, why sit around and wait? All right, that's the whole thing. So, hopefully, this helps you think about things that you're not thinking about right now. Now, I will say, if you're still with me, at the end of this video here, there is a strong psychological tendency to filter out any information or suggested actions that exceed a person's intensity threshold, we'll say. So, if we're talking about health and I say, if you put this watch-looking device on your hand and count the number of steps you do, you're more likely to be more active in the day and you might lose a little weight. You're like, oh, that sounds cool. I'll put the watch on. You give it to me as a gift so I don't have to pay for it. Yeah, I'll wear the watch. We'll see what happens. And you'll probably take more steps. You'll probably lose a little weight. Life is good, right? But if I say, hey, if you fasted for 3 days every 2 months, you wouldn't be overweight anymore. And it's a lifelong thing that you could do and it solves the problem. It's done. You never have to worry about being overweight again. That's probably outside of the window of extremity that you're willing to consider. Maybe a better example is if someone is trying to quit smoking, they're realizing that little ways of trying to quit smoking are going to fail, and you really have to do something big. And most people will say, no, I'm just not willing to do that until they get diagnosed with emphysema. And now all of a sudden they quit cold turkey. Fancy that, right? Why? Because their idea of the expected result was too far off for them to prefer it changing, even if it comes at a high cost, to just staying the same. We have to overcome this psychological tendency. We have to develop the ability to set our intensity window based on the problem at hand. If you find yourself in a foxhole that's getting shelled, it really doesn't matter if you're comfortable cowering in this foxhole. You have to do it or you're going to die. We talked about existential problems. If you don't have a gas-powered car and you live in a rural area and they outlaw, if you live in a rural area and they outlaw gas-powered vehicles, life as you know it is over. So you're either Amish or dead. You have to understand that the gravity of the future is, everything is like that. And these are not things that are far off. I've shown you the people who feel this way are already in power. And that's not going to change. It doesn't matter who gets elected. In any level of government, it's too late. The person can change out, all the people making the decisions stay this way. So it's time to wake up and start facing reality, even if it's gruesome. Get yourself in a place where as these things continue to change, you're more prepared for it.